reading from St. Luke's Gospel, chapter 24, beginning at verse 46. Jesus said to his disciples, "Thus it is written, that the Messiah is to suffer and to rise from the dead on the third day, and that repentance and forgiveness of sins is to be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things. And see, I am sending upon you what my Father promised. So stay here in the city until you have been clothed with power from on high." Then he led them out as far as Bethany, and lifting up his hands, he blessed them. While he was blessing them, he withdrew from them and was carried up into heaven. And they worshipped him and returned to Jerusalem with great joy. And they were continually in the temple, blessing God.
Thank you, Frank. This reading comes right at the end of Luke's Gospel. And one of the things I had to do a week or so ago as part of my study was read the whole of Luke's Gospel in one sitting for an assignment.
That's a good challenge.
It was great, but what it did for me was really gave me a wonderful picture of the whole story of the Gospel. And I love this passage at the end. It contains so much. I especially love the very end. The disciples that they aren't just left hanging after Jesus has gone. The disciples worshipped him, returned to Jerusalem with great joy, and continually in the temple blessing God.
Of course, my cynical take on this is that they finally got it, because right through the Gospels, so often the disciples just don't seem to know what's going on, do they? And I mean, even the beginning of this passage that I read a moment ago, it picks up ideas. Thus it is written that the Messiah should suffer and rise from the dead. And these are actually really difficult concepts for us to grasp. We've spent the last 6 or 7 weeks since Easter Day, this whole period of Easter, wrestling really, what does it mean to say somebody died for me, for my sins, and gives me life through resurrection? And now we're moving, well today in fact we're talking about Ascension, the Ascension reading. Next week is Pentecost. It's good to see the disciples going with joy to worship.
Especially compared to the short ending of Mark is a very abrupt ending to the Gospel. But I thought, as I had read right through Luke, he started at the very beginning saying, "I'm writing an orderly account." And it seemed to me that he finished that off in a very orderly way as well.
He must have been to a good school, clearly, yes.
But there's also lots in here. In a way, it sums up what we are called to do as followers of Christ. The reading talked about repentance and forgiveness and proclamation. And in a way, it sums up the end of the Christ story in a way.
And the beginning of the next one. Yes, absolutely. Making that wonderful link, of course, between the 2 volumes of Luke,
and
the Gospel
which follows.
and Acts which follows. Yes.
At the end of my assignment, I had to reflect on what I was thinking, and I got to the end, and all I wanted to do was to keep on reading to the next part and keep reading.
That may be a word of encouragement to people watching this, actually. Sit down and read a Gospel right through on its own, and just revel in the story as it goes through, and notice things like that, these little things that we know are there. Those of us who worship week by week, we know are there, but we don't always notice.
That's right. And in our Sunday readings and our lectionary readings, we're getting a little snippet from a particular chapter of a Gospel. But reading for the whole story and the drama that's so rich in the Gospel reading is a wonderful way of reading.
I want to just take half a minute to tell you about this beautiful backdrop behind us, which is it is quite controversial, because some people say it's the resurrected, ascended Christ, and others say, but if you look carefully, there are no holes and nail holes, so it's actually a heretical Christ. But whatever it is, the story I've heard from Beverly Shaw Bennett, who's the artist, was that she was driving back from Wellington to her home on the Kapiti Coast. And I'm not sure if it was a storm had just been or was about to come, and she saw this incredible light, and it was for her a real God incidence, and it just sort of clicked. It said, that's what we need behind the high altar in Wellington Cathedral. And whatever else it is, it's certainly a talking point. Is this the transfigured Christ before crucifixion? Or is this the resurrected Christ, the ascended Christ, the glorified Christ? Does it really matter?
Well, it's certainly a focal point when people come into this building.
Absolutely.
Their eyes are drawn straight to that figure behind the altar.
Yeah. And which ties in perhaps with what we were reading about a moment, the forgiveness and the spread of that message out all as we worship with joy and with gladness.